welcome to the Art of Being Human. Now, I've been teaching classes on the stages of development of people from birth until death, and right now we're in the toddler period. There's a lot of things that happen in the toddler period and also the preschool period that's very, very important. The infant period, where the person actually develops into a human being and not just an appendage of somebody else. So I want to spend a few minutes before I go back to the toddlerhood period and talk about individuation and what that means. There is a growing sense that in the toddler period of time, and maybe late infancy, the baby starts to realize that they are their own person. They're not just an appendage of somebody else. Now, it's long been thought by psychologists, although I don't know how you would ever test this out, that babies think of themselves as being part of their caregivers, kind of attached. And I can understand why they would think that. The baby cries, mom comes. The baby needs to be changed, mom changes him. He's crying, so mom picks him up. It's time to eat, mom comes. Well, whoever the caregiver is, it may be the mother, it may be somebody else, but there's a caregiver on hand at all times, and when the baby has any kind of a need, it's immediately taken care of by the caregiver. And so therefore it would be natural to assume that the baby thinks, although the baby's not really thinking yet, but the baby senses out that he's somehow attached to this caregiver. And I know it's probably true, even though I can't prove it, because when the caregiver leaves and goes into another room, the baby panics and cries. As far as the baby is concerned, when they're out of sight, they're gone. So it's like a part of himself is gone. But somewhere in that toddler period and the infancy period, the baby starts to realize that they're their own person. They're not attached to anybody else, but they are themselves. Now, of course, this cannot be verbalized. It can't be verbalized because the verbal skills aren't there yet. But there is this growing sense. You know, parents talk about the terrible twos and how bad they are. But you can understand it if you understand it in context with what's going on in the baby's development. The baby senses that he is himself and not somebody else. But he's got to test this out. He's got to be sure. It goes from I am me instead of I am a part of you. If you can understand this, this is important. Now, this is a critical period of time, which is why I want to spend time with it. The baby has to get to the point where he understands that he is himself, nobody else. Other people take care of him. He has relationships with people who take care of him. But at the same time, it is he himself. And it's interesting to watch it. If there's something happens and this individuation does not occur or it doesn't occur in a healthy manner, a child will be totally dependent when they grow up on somebody to help them make decisions, or they'll be making bad decisions, or their lives will just always be in crisis because they can't fully take care of themselves because they've never learned to be themselves. So this is a very critical first step in personality development. It's something that we need to spend time with. I know a lot of people say psychologists and psychiatrists, when they deal with you, they want to go back into your past. And they say, why bother? Fix the problem as it is now. Well, the problem with that thinking is that all of those problems get started in the past. And you need sometimes, not always, because not everyone needs this, but where it's needed, you need to go back into the past and find out what happened in childhood. How did this child learn to individuate from those who took care of him? Was he able to do it? Was she able to do it? And if they can't do it, they're bound to have problems as they grow older because they haven't truly become themselves. So when the terrible twos come along and the baby is saying, or basically a toddler is a walking baby, and they constantly say, no, come here, it's time for dinner, no. Put on your sweater, no. And that word no is a challenge. It shows that I am me and I can refuse what somebody else is asking me to do. And that shores me up, and I know that I'm an individual because I have the right to say yes or no. And the way that I say no may change people's perception of me. Babies learn that they can alter the moods of their parents by saying no. So they're gaining some power from this. But it's all in the development of their personality. Now, because you can't let them get away with it. You don't want them to be a tyrant, so you have to keep your power over them. But at the same time, they do have to test out where the limits are, and they have to test out the fact that they are really themselves and not somebody else. Now, you can see babies start this process. If you look at a baby, they're not yet walking, and they take their little hands and they start moving their fingers, and they're fascinated by this. They move their fingers, and it suddenly realizes, you can see the little mind working, they are doing it. Nobody else is making their fingers move, but they can look at their fingers and make them move. And so right there, they're learning something about themselves. It seems minute, but it's not. It's a critical first step that they take toward being a person in their own right. When they realize that they can move their hands by themselves, well, then they can move their feet by themselves. Then they can start to crawl. Now, the average age for crawling is about 10 months. I have a great nephew. He's still an infant. He's only 5 months old. He started to crawl already. That's way early. So what does it mean when your child is doing things earlier than expected? Usually the child, if they're growing fast and they meet their markers early, what they call growth markers early, it usually means they're very bright. They're growing fast, and if the body is growing fast and learning and growing sooner than you expect, the brain is also doing the same thing. So it usually turns out that they're very bright. So I got my first Facebook picture of a tiny 5-month-old trying to crawl and being able to do it. So, I mean, there's a lot of variations. The typical span of development is they have certain areas of development that they go through at certain times. But the time spans can vary quite a bit. So at any rate, you can see babies growing up. Now he has to test out and see if he is a person in his own right. He doesn't know much in terms of language skills. A 2-year-old doesn't talk much. They know mama, dada, no, out. If their doll is fixed, daddy fixed, 2-word sentences. But they practice that word no. And the reason is they've got to establish the fact that they are an individual. So you don't let them take control, but it is very important that they go through that process. And if you understand it in the context of what's happening to them personally, that they are growing to be their own selves, then that starts to make sense. It's a challenge for a parent, but just remember this phase of saying no and being in the terrible twos, that's going to phase off. That's not going to last. And then it's going to return. What we find in child development is that early on, a child will struggle with something, and then it phases off, and then it comes back in future years. Like, for example, the independence. Are the independent? Am I really me and not somebody else? It starts in that early toddler period, and then it phases off, and it comes back as an adolescent, when they are, once again, are testing the limits and finding out who they are, and can't I make my own decisions, and why do I have to obey what my parents tell me, and this and that and the other. So it all comes back in the teenage period. Only in the teenage period the parent doesn't have the same control as they do over a toddler. So it's challenging, but it returns in teenage years, and then the child has more verbal skills to deal with it. And also they have to learn how to make decisions. So I want to give you an example. If you have a child and you haven't taught them how to make decisions, when they get to be an adult or a teenager or adult, they won't be able to make decisions, or they'll make bad decisions. And you say, how could they do it? Common sense should tell them they shouldn't have done this, they should have done that. But nobody has common sense unless they're taught. And you teach them early, and you set things up so you can teach them. And I'm going to give you an example. Supposing it's a little cool out. You want your toddler to wear a sweater, but you also want them to make decisions. So you say you have to wear a sweater, it's cold out. Then you teach them a decision. Which sweater would you like to wear? Would you like to wear your red one, or your blue one, or your green one? The child makes a decision. Well, I want to wear the red one. Okay, you can wear the red one. And what has happened here is he's learned to make a decision as to what sweater to wear. But the decision has been set up. The decision is not, am I going to wear a sweater or not? That's already been determined by the parents because of the outside temperature. So what you do is you are teaching them how to make a decision in a safe manner where they're not going to hurt themselves and it's not going to be a big deal what decision they make. And this is the first step. I had a high school teacher, a colleague of mine, saying, I won't let somebody make a decision unless they're going to hurt themselves with it or they're going to be in trouble with it. Then they learn to obey me. But I don't consider this to be the right way. You teach them to make a decision that turns out to be right. Now, it's a very simple decision, but what you've done is you have established a parameter, a safe parameter, and you teach them to make a decision within that parameter, and then they can't make a wrong decision, but they're learning how to make a decision that will turn out to be right. Well, how many decisions do we make in our lives? You know, when I was teaching, I usually moved about every 4 years. But I needed to know where's the right place to go. And the hardest decisions that you're going to make is when all the decisions are good ones, but one may be better than the rest. How do you make a decision if you have two good ones and you have to choose between them? And you want to know which is the best. That's the hard thing. It's easy to say no if it's a bad decision versus a good decision. It's easy to say no to the bad one if you're an adult and you've been taught how as you've grown up. But if you have two good decisions, you have to look very carefully at what your options are. Now, we expect teens to make wise choices, and they don't. And we wonder why. How can you make a decision that's so bad? Well, for one reason, they haven't been taught how to do it. They don't know real life. And they haven't had any experience in doing it. And they cannot necessarily figure it out on their own. Why can't they figure it out on their own? Well, I'll take a look at this chart right here of the human brain. I've had this in several times, but I still use it a lot. This whole area is the frontal lobe of the brain. And in the frontal lobe of the brain, that is determined, your thinking process is there, and your understanding of consequences for behavior is there. But the teenage brain is rewiring. It's not working on all 4 cylinders. It just isn't. The brain rewires section by section by section. When a child gets to be about preteen, it starts. And as the brain is being rewired, the section that's being rewired cannot function fully as a normal part of the brain simply because it's like under construction. And the frontal cortex of this brain is not developed completely until age 25. It is the last of the parts of the brain to be developed. So when you have something like that, a person cannot make a fully functioning decision, and they know what's right and wrong because you've taught them morals all these years, and that's another thing you have to teach them is morals. But it doesn't really quite click in. They understand the words, you won't steal, no, I won't steal, and they understand all of these things, but it doesn't quite click in with the brain, which doesn't quite catch it because it's under construction. So teenagers can't always be depended on to make good decisions. Not that they wouldn't try, but the fact is the brain isn't there yet. When you consider a child graduates from high school, say at about 17 or 18 years, let's just say that, he's still got a few more years before his brain is finished developing. So how can you expect him to always make wise decisions? This is where the parents come in. This is where the parents have to be a help. If you have a good, trusting relationship with your child, expect them to make mistakes because they're not fully developed yet. But within that context, you've been teaching them right from wrong. You've been teaching them how to make decisions. And then when the crux comes and they have to make a big one, like what college do I attend? There are so many factors involved in that. You have to help them with the decisions because they're really not able to do it on their own completely. And so that's very important. Are they involved in sports? Is there such a thing as a sports scholarship that they can have? How far away from home is it? Do they like being away from home? Do they feel safer being closer to home? What kind of curriculums does the college have? If the child is interested in engineering, do they have a good engineering school? What if they want medicine? Does a child go to a college that has a pre-medical program? I mean, there are all of these things to consider, also including finances and scholarship funds and all of that. There's a very, very hard decisions to make. And any decision that a person makes in their young life is going to affect them for years. If I decide to become a psychologist, I did go into psychology as a career. That affects who I know, who my friends are, what my salary is going to be, the kind of place where I'm going to live, because if you're a psychologist, then your friends are going to be psychologists. You know, if you're a teacher, your friends are going to be teachers, and the salaries are going to be somewhat the same, and so you're going to be able to afford houses similar. So it does affect you in all kinds of ways. So at any rate, the brain does not finish development and it rewires, and you have to have a trusting relationship with your child in order to be able to pull this off. Now, if you look, and I just wanted to bring this in, if you look how do you shepherd a child, I like to use the word shepherd because that's what we do with our children. If you look at a shepherd and a sheep, the shepherd leads the sheep. He goes out in front of the sheep follow him. The sheep recognize his voice, the sheep trust him, and they will follow him. What the shepherd does not do, he doesn't get behind the sheep and drive them, because that's not the way sheep can respond, and it's not what shepherds do. So if you can consider yourself like a shepherd, you're leading your child, you're protecting your child, you're helping your child, but you're not driving them. Maybe they don't want to go to college. Maybe they want to do something else instead. You need to consider all options, but the thing is you need to help them to consider all options because the final decision may well be theirs. And if they've not had any kind of experience in making decisions, by the time they come to that critical point where they must, that's going to be a very, very difficult thing to do. So you need to help them to get decisions, realize they are a person in their own right. They have some of your characteristics. They have some of your spouse's characteristics. They may have some of your grandmother's characteristics. What's good for them? What's good for you? What works for the family? All of these things have to be taken into consideration. And even a teenage child that has had some experience in making decisions, it's not clear to them, and it may not be clear to the parent either. So it is important that the child transition and be able to make their own decisions and be able to realize that they are a person in their own right, and that is respected by their parents, and it's respected by other people as well. When is a child an adult? Probably 2 years sooner than the parent thinks, but 2 years later than what their friends think. So it's just there's a lot of cultural issues to be involved here too that you have to be aware of. So at any rate, I just want to bring this up. There is a few weeks of intimacy, learning how to be present with your child, learning how to nourish them, learning how to cherish them, learning how to lead them, and that kind of an intimate relationship is a background to allowing them to somehow make their own decisions gradually over a period of time. So when the decision making comes to a crux, they're more ready than they would be if you hadn't established the parameters for them to be able to learn how to make decisions on your own. Now, I remember I taught classes in helping retarded children. It's not retardation is a word that we don't like to use, but they were retarded, and I had to teach them things and help them to learn to make decisions. But these are life decisions that people normally do without trouble. We had a school, and the school was interesting because I could teach children, I could teach girls. I taught the girls, somebody else taught the boys life skills. And you know, most children will pick up on the fact that mom does the dishes and this is what she does, and the dish liquid goes into the dishpan, not too much and so forth, but retarded children don't catch it. So therefore you have to teach them. So I would teach these girls, here it is, there's a dishpan here, you put warm water in it, not too hot, not too cold, and then you can pour a little bit of your dishwashing liquid, not the whole bottle, just a little bit, and you teach them those basic skills. Well, a lot of children learn a lot of basic skills just by observation of their parents and other people, but they don't learn everything. They don't learn decision-making skills, but they can learn a certain amount of life skills on their own. Children who don't have those advantages, or they do have some retardation or intellectual problems, you have to teach them the basic things. You know, we had an apartment set up. It was fascinating. We had an apartment set up, and we had a kitchen, and we had a living room, and we had a bedroom and a bathroom. And I taught them how to live in an apartment. That was part of their structure. This is part of their education. Because we couldn't dismiss them unless they knew how to live. And so basic things that everyone takes for granted, I had to teach them. With the boys, they loved cars. We had a mock-up gas station, and they would be taught math skills. The girls were too, but in a different way. With a boy, with the mock-up gas station and the pump, you know, if it costs $1 for a gallon of gas, how much does it cost for 2 gallons? And using it in practical life skills, they were taught certain things that they could manage to live. I mean, they could be taught that you stop at a red light, you go on a green light if you're driving, and this kind of thing. Basic skills. Now, we don't think too much about it. For us, it's natural, but for a child with disabilities, it's not natural. So if you can think of these children, both the healthy ones and those that aren't quite so healthy, learning how to live, learning how to make decisions, it's going to be critically important. So if they do not transition through getting their personhood straightened out so they know that they're a person, if they can't do that successfully, what's going to happen? They're not going to be able to make decisions, or they're going to make bad decisions because they're not going to know the difference. And also, they're going to be very dependent upon people to make decisions for them. The decisions for them would be, okay, I have to buy a house. I'll have to call my parents. They'll show me what house to buy. It fosters a dependence of the child on the parent if they cannot transition into adult maturity, and if they cannot transition into being an independent person. They have to be dependent upon other people to help them make decisions, or they're going to make bad decisions, and that's not going to be good. So starting from toddlerhood, infancy, late infancy, toddlerhood, preschool, we're going to get into that too. There's lots and lots of decisions that children are faced with. How do you shepherd them through it so that they can become mature adults and be able to live normally and not be terribly dependent upon their parents or anybody else to help them with decisions, because a time will come when they won't be able to be dependent. They have to be independent, and that starts very, very early in life. And that's why in counseling sometimes you have to get back there in order to help a person to restructure themselves in order to recover from whatever it is that they need to recover from. Well, we're kind of running out of time, and so therefore I'm going to close it here, and we're going to continue with this next time. Please join me then.